The entire story of the Inquisition. How the Church turned fear into law. In the quiet corridors of medieval Europe, fear did not always arrive with swords or armies. Often, it came wrapped in parchment, sealed with wax, and spoken in the language of salvation. The Inquisition was not born overnight, nor was it simply an outbreak of cruelty. It emerged slowly, carefully, as a legal system designed to hunt invisible enemies, ideas, beliefs, doubts, and to turn spiritual anxiety into enforceable law. To understand the Inquisition, one must first understand the medieval world itself. Europe in the Middle Ages was not divided cleanly between religion and government. Faith was the foundation of social order, political legitimacy, and moral truth. To challenge doctrine was not merely to disagree. It was to threaten the stability of the entire world. Heresy, in this context, was not an opinion. It was a disease. And diseases, medieval thinkers believed, had to be cut out before they infected the body. The earliest roots of the Inquisition can be traced to the 12th century, when the Church began to face organized movements that rejected its authority. Groups such as the Cathars and Waldensians questioned the wealth of clergy, the corruption of bishops, and even core Christian doctrines. These movements spread rapidly, especially among the poor, who saw in them a purer form of faith. For church leaders, this was alarming. Not only were souls at risk, but the Church's role as the sole interpreter of divine truth was under attack. At first, the response was inconsistent. Local bishops were tasked with investigating heresy in their regions, but many lacked the training, resources, or will to do so effectively. Some were lenient, others were brutal. The result was chaos, uneven justice, mob violence, and lynchings carried out by frightened communities. It was in this disorder that the Church saw the need for structure. Fear, after all, could be managed more efficiently through law. In 1231, Pope Gregory IX formalized this system by creating what would later be known as the Papal Inquisition. Instead of leaving investigations to local authorities, the Church appointed specially trained inquisitors, often members of the Dominican and Franciscan orders. These men were educated, disciplined, and loyal to Rome. Their task was not to punish indiscriminately, but to investigate systematically. The Inquisition was, at its core, a court. This legal nature is what makes the Inquisition particularly unsettling. It operated through written procedures, sworn testimony, and formal sentencing. Accusations were often anonymous. The accused rarely knew who had spoken against them. Guilt was assumed, not innocence. Confession was the goal, because confession saved the soul, even if the body suffered. In a world where eternal damnation was considered far worse than death, this logic made grim sense. Torture, while not as universally applied as popular imagination suggests, was legally permitted under strict rules. It was used when evidence was deemed strong but incomplete. Importantly, torture could not legally draw blood or cause permanent injury, though in practice, these limits were often ignored. Devices such as the strappado, which dislocated shoulders, or prolonged sleep deprivation were favored because they left fewer visible marks. Pain became a tool of mercy, at least in theory. Better to suffer briefly on earth than burn forever in hell. Perhaps the most infamous branch of this system was the Spanish Inquisition, established in 1478 under Ferdinand and Isabella. Unlike earlier Inquisitions, it was controlled by the monarchy rather than directly by the Pope. Its primary targets were conversos, Jews and Muslims, who had converted to Christianity but were suspected of secretly practicing their former faiths. In newly unified Spain, religious uniformity was seen as essential to political unity. Here, the Inquisition became a weapon of the state, blending faith with nationalism. Public punishments played a crucial role in maintaining fear. The auto da fe, or act of faith, was a carefully staged public ceremony. Prisoners, dressed in symbolic garments, painted with flames or demons, were paraded before crowds. Sentences were read aloud. Some were reconciled and released. Others were handed over to secular authorities for execution, often by burning. The Church, notably, did not officially execute anyone. It merely declared them beyond salvation. The state did the rest. Yet the Inquisition was not only about terror. It was also about record-keeping, bureaucracy, and control. Detailed archives were maintained, documenting confessions, family histories, and networks of belief. Entire communities were mapped through suspicion. Once accused, a person's children and grandchildren could remain under scrutiny for generations. Fear became hereditary. Over time, the Inquisition expanded beyond heresy. It pursued blasphemy, witchcraft, forbidden books, sexual deviance, and unapproved mysticism. With the invention of the printing press, controlling ideas became even more urgent. The Index of Forbidden Books sought to regulate what people could read, ensuring that dangerous thoughts never took root. Knowledge itself was placed on trial. Despite its power, the Inquisition was not omnipotent. Its intensity varied by region and period. In some areas, it faded into bureaucratic routine. In others, it erupted into waves of persecution. By the Enlightenment, growing emphasis on reason, individual rights, and secular law began to undermine its authority. States no longer needed the Church to police belief. Fear was still useful, but it could now be generated by governments alone. The last remnants of the Inquisition were formally dismantled in the 19th century, yet its legacy lingers. It left behind a model of how institutions can transform moral anxiety into legal systems, how fear can be rationalized, documented, and enforced. The true horror of the Inquisition lies not only in its punishments, but in its calm certainty. It did not see itself as cruel. It saw itself as necessary. In the end, the Inquisition reminds us that the most enduring forms of control are not always imposed by violence alone. They are built through laws, rituals, and beliefs that convince people that fear is righteousness and that obedience is salvation. Now, I want you to close your eyes. Let the heavy velvet curtain of the present day fall away. Breathe in deep. Can you smell it? The scent of damp stone, the metallic tang of old iron, and the overwhelming sweet heaviness of beeswax candles burning in a drafty cathedral. We are drifting back 800 years to a world lit only by fire and belief. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. We find ourselves in a time before the Inquisition has a name, yet the architecture of the mind that will build it is already complete. Imagine a world where the sky is not just atmosphere, but the literal floor of heaven, and the earth beneath your feet is a thin crust over the fires of hell. In this world, the Church is not an institution you visit on Sundays. It is the physics of your universe. It is the gravity holding your soul to the earth. To be a peasant in the 12th century is to live in a constant state of vulnerability. Crops fail, fevers take children in the night, and winter is a beast that eats the unprepared. Life is fragile and often short, which might explain why no one really worried about retirement plans. They worried about eternity. In this delicate existence, the Church offers the only security, the promise that this suffering has meaning. This is what historians often call the great chain of being, a divine hierarchy where everyone has a place, from the king down to the lowliest serf, and stepping out of line isn't just rebellion, it is a cosmic error. It is in this atmosphere of absolute belief that the seed of the Inquisition is planted, not out of malice initially, but out of a desperate desire for order. You see, the medieval mind views a heretic not as a rebel with a different opinion, but as a person carrying a contagious spiritual plague. If your neighbor dumps poison in the village well, the law punishes him to save the village's bodies. But if your neighbor speaks against the Trinity, he is poisoning the village's souls, risking their eternal damnation. Which crime is worse? To the medieval mind, the answer is obvious. The poisoner only kills the body. The heretic kills the soul forever. This is the tragic foundational truth we must hold on to as we walk into the dark. The men who built the dungeons believed, truly and deeply, that they were the good guys. They were the surgeons trying to cut out the rot. And as the 12th century turns, the rot begins to show. In the bustling markets of southern France and the quiet valleys of Italy, strange new voices are whispering. They are not asking for money or power. They are asking for poverty. They are asking why the Pope sits on a golden throne while Christ walked in sandals. These questions are dangerous. They are the cracks in the dam. And as we shall see, when the dam breaks, the water does not care who it drowns. The architecture of faith is strong, but it is brittle. And the first hammers are about to strike against the stone. The first whispers. The wind shifts now, carrying us south. We leave the cold stone of the northern cathedrals and drift toward the sun-drenched vineyards of Languedoc in what is today southern France. The year is drifting towards the late 12th century, and the air here feels different. Lighter, perhaps, but charged with a static electricity that makes the hair on your arms stand up. In these bustling market towns and quiet mountain villages, the architecture of faith we just spoke of is beginning to show hairline fractures. It starts not with a shout, but with a whisper, a gentle questioning of the way things are. You see, the church in this era is powerful, yes, but it is also heavy with earthly riches. Bishops ride through town on magnificent horses, their fingers heavy with jeweled rings, while the local priests sometimes struggle to recite the Latin Mass correctly. To a peasant who spends his life breaking his back in the fields, watching a cleric feast on roasted swan while preaching about the virtues of suffering might feel a bit like a bad joke without a punchline. Into this gap between the ideal and the reality step the good men. This is what they call themselves, bonshommes, though history will know them by a sharper name, the Cathars. Imagine meeting one of them on a dusty road. He wears black, rough wool, not silk. He is thin, ascetic, his face weathered by fasting. He does not ask for your tithe. He offers you a piece of bread. He tells you that the world you see, the mud, the blood, the decay, the church buildings, the gold, is not the work of the good God. It is the creation of a lesser, darker deity, a distinct force of evil. The true God, he whispers, is pure spirit, untouched by this rotting material world. This idea, known as dualism, is poetic, terrifying, and strictly speaking, an absolute disaster for Catholic theology. If the material world is evil, then Jesus could not have taken on a human body, for God would never trap himself in the devil's clay. If Jesus had no body, he did not die on the cross. If he did not die, he did not resurrect. And if he did not resurrect, the entire structure of the church, the Eucharist, the priesthood, the promise of salvation through the sacraments, evaporates like morning mist. The Cathars are not just debating the rules, they are trying to dissolve the game board. But they are not the only ones. In the city of Lyon, a wealthy merchant named Peter Waldo has a sudden crisis of conscience, perhaps the medieval equivalent of a midlife crisis. But instead of buying a sports chariot, he gives away all his money to the poor and starts preaching from the Bible in the local language, not Latin. The Waldensians, as his followers are called, are not claiming the world is evil. They just think the church should look more like Jesus and less like a bank. Ironically, the church actually admires poverty. St. Francis of Assisi will do the exact same thing a few decades later and become a saint. But Waldo makes the fatal mistake of preaching without permission. In the 12th century, preaching is a professional license, like practicing medicine. You don't just let an amateur perform surgery on the soul, no matter how good his intentions are. The hierarchy tells Waldo to stop. He refuses. And just like that, a man who wants to live like the apostles becomes an enemy of the apostolic successor. Historians still argue vigorously about the true nature of these groups, particularly the Cathars. Some scholars suggest that the Cathar Church was never as organized or unified as the Inquisitors claimed, proposing that the Church may have taken a loose collection of local folk beliefs and philosophical skeptics and painted them all with the same brush, creating a monolithic enemy out of a patchwork of dissent. It is a debate that lingers. Did the Inquisition find the heresy, or did the Inquisition invent the heresy to justify its own existence? Regardless of the academic nuance, the threat felt very real to Rome. The Church initially tries to debate them. Monks are sent to argue theology in town squares. But the bonshommes are charismatic, and the crowds often side with the skinny men in wool over the fat men in silk. It is a public relations nightmare. When words fail, the mood in Rome darkens. Pope Innocent III, a man of immense intellect and iron will, decides that if the infection cannot be cured by medicine, the limb must be amputated. In 1209, he calls for a crusade, not against Muslims in the Holy Land, but against Christians in France. This is the Albigensian Crusade, a 20-year war that tears the heart out of Languedoc. It is a brutal, muddy, bloody affair. Knights from the north descend on the south, eager for salvation and spoiled loot. We see the worst of it at the city of Béziers. The Crusaders surround the walls, demanding the heretics be handed over. The city refuses. When the walls are breached, the soldiers ask the papal legate, Arnaud Amalric, how to distinguish the Catholic faithful from the Cathar heretics in the panic of the slaughter. His reported reply chills the blood across 8 centuries. Kill them all. God will know his own. Whether he actually said those exact words is debated, but the result was the same. The city is burned. Thousands die. The silence that follows is heavy, smelling of smoke and iron. But here is the crucial realization. the turning point that will birth the Inquisition proper. War is a blunt instrument. It is messy. It destroys the innocent along with the guilty, and worse, it does not actually change minds. You can burn a city, but you cannot burn a secret thought hiding in a survivor's head. As the smoke clears over Languedoc, the Church realizes that an army is useless against an idea. The heretics have gone underground, blending into the population, whispering in cellars and forest clearings. The sword has failed. They need something more precise. They need a way to look inside a person, to peel back the layers of the mind and see what is written on the soul. They don't need a soldier anymore. They need a detective. And so, as the 13th century dawns, the chaos of the crusade begins to settle into something colder and more bureaucratic. The time of the mob is ending. The time of the tribunal is beginning. The Church understands now that fear must be administered, not like a thunderstorm, but like a prescription, measured, recorded, and strictly controlled. The transition is subtle. It happens in quiet rooms where scribes sharpen their quills and lawyers debate the definitions of proof. The goal is no longer just to kill the heretic, but to identify him, isolate him, and if possible, cure him. It is a shift from the battlefield to the courtroom, from the chaos of war to the order of law. And it is here, in this shift, that the true weight of the Inquisition begins to press down on history. The first whispers of dissent have been met with a scream of violence, but the scream is fading, replaced by the scratching of pens on parchment, a sound far quieter, and in the end, far more terrifying. The stage is set for a man named Gregory IX to take this scattered energy and forge it into a system that will outlast empires. The sun sets on the ruins of Béziers, casting long purple shadows across the French countryside, and in the twilight, we can almost hear the heavy wooden doors of the future closing, locking the world inside a room where the only way out is the truth, or what the Inquisitor decides the truth must be. The paperwork of fear. The quill scratches. It is a dry, rasping sound, like a beetle skittering across dry leaves. And in the year 1231, this sound is louder than the clash of swords. We have left the muddy, blood-soaked fields of Languedoc behind. The smoke of the crusade has drifted away, replaced by the scent of dust, iron golink, and the cool, damp stone of the Lateran Palace in Rome. Here, in the heart of the church, the air is still. It is the stillness of a library, where the silence is not empty, but heavy with thought. The man sitting at the desk is old, over 80, some say, though his eyes are as sharp as a hawk's. This is Pope Gregory IX. He is not a warrior like the Crusaders. He is a lawyer. And to a lawyer, the chaos of the last 20 years, the burnings, the mobs, the sheer disorganized panic of the fight against heresy, is offensive not just to God, but to order. You see, up until this moment, hunting heretics was a bit like putting out a kitchen fire. You grabbed whatever bucket was nearby and threw it. Local bishops were supposed to do it, but they were often lazy, corrupt, or simply too busy arguing with their neighbors over land rights. When they failed, the mob took over. Terrified villagers, convinced that the strange woman down the lane was cursing their cows, would take matters into their own hands. It was messy. It was unpredictable. And worse, secular rulers, kings and emperors, were starting to use heresy charges as a convenient excuse to execute their political enemies. The Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II, a man the church trusted about as far as they could throw a cathedral, had recently declared that all heretics in his lands should be burned. The Pope realized that if the church didn't take control of the situation, the state would. And in the medieval struggle for power, that was unacceptable. So Gregory does something revolutionary. He takes the weapon of fear away from the mob and hands it to the bureaucrat. With the papal bull Excommunicamus and a series of subsequent letters, he effectively invents the office of the Inquisitor. No longer will heresy be a local police matter. It is now a crime against the universal church, requiring a universal solution. He turns to two new orders of friars to carry out this task, the Dominicans and the Franciscans. This is a brilliant, if cynical, move. The local bishops are too rich and disconnected from the people. The Dominicans, however, are scholars, trained in theology, sharp-witted, and obsessed with doctrinal purity. They are the hounds of the Lord, a pun on their Latin name, Dominicanes. The Franciscans are humble, poor, and trusted by the common folk. By appointing them, Gregory ensures that the Inquisitor is an outsider, someone who cannot be bribed by a local noble and who doesn't care whose cousin is sleeping with whom in the village. They answer only to Rome. Imagine the arrival of an Inquisitor in a mid-sized French town in 1235. He does not storm the gates. He rides in quietly, perhaps on a mule, accompanied by a scribe and a few assistants. He is not a monster in a mask. He is a calm, educated man in a rough habit. He goes to the town square and preaches a sermon. He explains, with the patience of a schoolteacher, that there is a sickness in the town, a spiritual cancer that endangers everyone. But he is not here to destroy. He is here to heal. He announces a period of grace, usually 15 to 30 days. During this time, anyone who has strayed, anyone who has listened to a kata bonum, anyone who has had a doubt can come forward and confess. If they do, their penance will be light, a few prayers, a pilgrimage to a nearby shrine, maybe wearing a yellow cross on their tunic for a while. It is a limited time offer of mercy. This is the psychological brilliance of the system. It divides the community instantly. If you are guilty, you have a choice. Confess now and suffer a little shame, or stay silent and risk everything. But the real genius and the true horror lies in what happens next. The Inquisitor asks you not just about your own sins, but about your neighbors. Did you see anyone else at the meeting in the woods? Who brought the bread? Who listened? Suddenly, the town is no longer a community. It is a web of suspicion. To save yourself, you must become an informant. The paperwork of fear begins to pile up. The scribe, sitting quietly in the corner, dips his pen and records every name, every whisper, every grudge. These records are not thrown away. They are indexed, cross-referenced. If you move to another town 3 years later, the file follows you. For the first time in European history, the government, in this case the church, is building a database of its citizens' thoughts. Historians often point out a grim irony here. The Inquisition introduced legal advancements that we actually value today, though for very different reasons. Before this, trials were often accusatorial, meaning if I accused you of murder, I had to prove it, and if I failed, I might get punished for lying. It was a duel of words. The Inquisition introduced the inquisitorial procedure, where the state investigates the crime itself. It meant the court was seeking the truth rather than just settling a dispute. It was more scientific, more rigorous, and infinitely more dangerous for the accused because the judge was also the prosecutor. The deck wasn't just stacked, the cards were marked. There is a dark humor in the bureaucracy, the kind that only makes sense if you don't think about the human cost too long. The manuals written for these inquisitors are filled with the sort of dry, administrative headaches you might find in a modern HR department. Inquisitors complained about travel expenses, about the cost of feeding prisoners, about the terrible handwriting of their scribes. One famous manual even advises inquisitors on how to deal with difficult suspects who try to outsmart them with logic, essentially telling the inquisitor, "Don't argue with them, just interrupt them and change the subject." It seems that middle management frustration is a timeless human condition, even when the business is salvation. But let us not lose sight of the reality beneath the ink. This system, this paperwork of fear, changed the texture of daily life. It turned the volume down on Europe. People stopped talking openly in taverns. They looked over their shoulders before speaking to old friends. The fear wasn't sharp like a sword anymore. It was dull and constant, like a toothache. The records from this time show us tragic glimpses of humanity trying to navigate the maze. We see testimony from a woman who admits she only gave bread to a heretic because he looked hungry, and she was afraid he would hex her chickens. We see a man confessing that he once said, "The Pope has too much money," while drunk, and he is terrified that this makes him a duelist. The inquisitor listens, nods, and the scribe writes it all down. Verba volant, scripta manent. Spoken words fly away, written words remain. By the mid-13th century, the machinery is humming. The chaotic violence of the mobs has been replaced by the cold, quiet efficiency of the tribunal. The period of grace expires. The town gates are watched. The inquisitor sits in the bishop's palace, the book of names open before him. The time for mercy is over. The time for inquisition, literally, the asking, has begun. And as the sun sets over the town, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, the people bolt their doors a little tighter, knowing that the man in the rough wool habit is still awake, reading, thinking, and preparing to ask the questions that will unravel their lives. The paper is waiting. The ink is wet, and the silence is deafening. The Inquisitor's Manual. The heavy leather cover of the book falls open with a soft thud, disturbing the dust motes dancing in the candlelight. We are now deep in the quiet hours of the night, inside the private study of an inquisitor. The year is perhaps 1324, and the place is Toulouse, the beating heart of the old Cathar resistance. The book on the desk is not a Bible. It is something far more pragmatic, a text that will become legendary among historians and terrifying to those who lived under its shadow. This is the Practica Inquisitionis Hereticae, the practice of the Inquisition of heretical depravity. Its author is Bernard Guy, a man whom popular culture often depicts as a wild-eyed fanatic or a villainous caricature, thanks to Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose. But the real Bernard Guy was far more dangerous than a cartoon villain because he was, above all else, a competent, boring, and utterly meticulous administrator. He was not a man who enjoyed cruelty. He was a man who enjoyed order. And this book, his masterpiece, was the instruction manual for imposing that order upon the chaos of the human soul. To understand the Inquisition, one must read what the Inquisitors read. This manual was the medieval equivalent of a field guide a textbook, and a psychological treatise all rolled into one. It did not rant, it instructed. It told the reader exactly how to act, how to speak, and even how to sit. Imagine opening the pages. You would find, surprisingly, that a large portion of the book is dedicated to what we might call human resources, templates for letters, forms for citations, and fill-in-the-blank sentences for excommunication. It is the bureaucracy of salvation. There is a grim, almost darkly humorous banality to it, like finding a standardized form for burning at the stake, Form 12B. It reminds us that the machinery of terror was lubricated by paperwork. But as you turn the pages, the tone shifts from administrative to psychological. Gui writes extensively on the wiles and deceptions of heretics. He warns the novice inquisitor that the enemy is not stupid. The heretic, he explains, will try to evade the truth through slippery language and feigned ignorance. They will say they are simple peasants who know nothing of theology. They will claim they only want to be good Christians. The manual teaches the inquisitor how to dismantle these defenses, not with a hammer, but with a scalpel. It is a guide to the art of the trap. For instance, the manual offers specific scripts for interrogating different types of dissenters. If you are questioning a Waldensian who believes it is a sin to swear an oath, the manual advises you to ask them to swear to tell the truth. If they refuse to swear, you have them. It is a catch-22 designed to turn a virtue into a confession. If they do swear, they have violated their own conscience, and the guilt will likely make them crumble later. The manual is filled with these logical pincer movements. It advises the inquisitor to feign surprise, to pretend he already knows everything, or to offer vague promises of mercy that are technically true but misleading. Tell me the truth, the inquisitor might say, guided by the book, and I will show you the mercy you deserve. The prisoner hears freedom, but the inquisitor means penance, which might involve life imprisonment on bread and water. The manual justifies this deception because the goal is not fairness. The goal is the salvation of the soul. You lie to the child to get him to take his medicine. There is a fascinating section where Gui categorizes the personality types of the accused. He describes the bold heretic who argues back and the fearful heretic who weeps. He warns against the mocking heretic who tries to make the court laugh. It is a comprehensive taxonomy of human behavior under pressure. What is most striking is the patience the manual advocates. It tells the inquisitor not to rush. If a prisoner is stubborn, send him back to his cell. Let the silence do the work. Let the darkness and the isolation soften his resolve. There is no need for shouting. The truth, Gui suggests, is a heavy sediment that will eventually settle if you just wait long enough. This creates a terrifying dynamic where the inquisitor is always the calmest person in the room. He is the doctor. The prisoner is the patient in a fever. Scholars today engage in a vigorous debate about the feedback loop created by these manuals. This is the inquisitorial invention theory. The argument goes like this. The manual describes a heretic in a very specific way. Someone who holds secret meetings, has specific rituals, and uses specific code words. When the inquisitor questions a suspect, he asks leading questions based on the book. Did you see the man in the black robe? Did you kiss the book? The terrified peasant, desperate to please this powerful man and stop the pain or the fear, eventually says, yes. The inquisitor writes it down. Now he has proof that matches the book. He then uses this confession to confirm the manual is correct. Did the Inquisition uncover a vast, organized underground church of Satan worshippers and duelists? Or did they simply project their own nightmares onto the peasantry and force them to agree to the script? It is a chilling thought that the heresy might have been constructed in the very room where it was being judged, built out of the fear of the accused and the expectations of the accuser. As we read further into the Practica, we see the sheer scope of the Inquisitor's gaze. It is not just about big theological ideas. The manual obsesses over the minutiae of daily life. It tells you to ask who the person ate with, who they walked with, who they greeted in the street. It turns the social fabric of a village into a criminal map. It effectively criminalizes friendship. If you shared a meal with a suspect, you are suspect by association. If you saw a heretic and didn't report him, you are faughters, supporters. The manual teaches the Inquisitor how to map these networks, drawing lines between families until the entire community is ensnared. It is an early form of social network analysis, used not for advertising, but for purging. And yet, for all its coldness, there are moments where the manual reveals a strange sort of empathy, or perhaps just a recognition of human frailty. It acknowledges that people lie because they are afraid. It acknowledges that torture can produce false confessions, though it still permits it. It is a book written by a man who understands human nature deeply, but who has decided that human nature is something to be overcome, not indulged. The Practica also standardizes the punishments, which we will explore later. But it is worth noting here that the manual treats sentencing almost like a medical prescription. For a light infection of heresy, a yellow cross sewn onto the clothes. For a moderate infection, a pilgrimage or a fine. For a relapsed or stubborn case, the secular arm, death. The book leaves nothing to chance. It removes the burden of decision from the individual inquisitor and places it on the system. You don't have to feel guilty about burning a man if you are just following the flowchart on page 204. This is the ultimate function of the manual. It allows the inquisitor to sleep at night. He is not a killer. He is an administrator of the law. We close the heavy book now. The leather is warm from the heat of the candle. The text inside has set the rules of the game. A game where the house always wins. Bernard Guy, the author, will die in his bed, a respected bishop and a celebrated historian. His manual will survive him for centuries, copied and recopied, carried in the saddlebags of inquisitors across France, Italy, and eventually Spain. It will become the blueprint for a machine that eats silence and spits out confessions. The inquisitor in our story stands up. He blows out the candle. The room plunges into darkness. But in his mind, everything is clear. He knows exactly what to do tomorrow. He has read the instructions, and as the dawn approaches, bringing with it the grey light of the Judgment Day, we realized that the most dangerous weapon in the Middle Ages was not the sword, the lance, or the trebuchet. It was the book. The heavy oak door swings shut behind you, and the iron bolt slides home with a sound that feels final. Thunk. It is a sound that separates your past life, the sunlight, the smell of baking bread, the laughter of your children, from your new reality. We have left the theoretical world of the manuals and the political world of the popes. We are now stepping into the intimate terrifying heart of the machine, the trial itself. But erase from your mind the image of a modern courtroom. There is no jury of your peers. There is no gallery of spectators gasping at dramatic revelations. There is no judge banging a gavel. In the Inquisition, the court is often just a small, chilly room in a Dominican priory or a bishop's palace. It is quiet, intimate, and that intimacy is what makes it so unnerving. The room is usually sparsely furnished. There is a table. There is a chair for the inquisitor, the judex, and a stool for you, the accused. And in the corner, always, sits the notary with his quill and inkpot, the silent third party who will record every stammer, every pause, and every contradiction. The air smells of old parchment and unwashed wool. You are alone here, cut off from the herd, and the man across the table is not looking at you with anger. He is looking at you with a weary, patient concern. He does not want to destroy you. He wants to save you. And that is why he is so dangerous. The trial begins not with an accusation, but with a question that is a trap in itself. The inquisitor does not say, "You are charged with denying the Trinity." He leans forward, clasps his hands, and asks, "Do you know why you have been summoned here?" This is the first psychological blow. If you guess correctly, you have confessed. If you guess incorrectly, you have revealed another sin he might not have known about. If you say nothing, you are impeding the Inquisition, which is a crime in itself. It is a game of blind man's bluff played on the edge of a cliff. The silence in the room stretches out, thick and suffocating. You can hear your own heart beating in your ears, a frantic drum against the calm scratching of the notary's pen. One of the most defining and terrifying features of this court is the anonymity of the accusers. In the Roman law that governed civil life, you had the right to face your accuser. If a neighbor said you stole his pig, he had to stand up in the village square and say it to your face. But the Inquisition operates under a different logic. The Church argued that heresy was such a dangerous crime, and heretics were so powerful and vindictive that witnesses needed protection. If their names were revealed, they might be murdered in their beds. Therefore, the names are redacted. You are fighting ghosts. You are told that trustworthy witnesses have testified that you were seen walking by the river with a known Cathar. Who was it? Was it the miller who owes you money? Was it your jealous sister-in-law? Was it a stranger who mistook you for someone else in the twilight? You will never know. You are boxing with shadows, swinging wildly in the dark, while the Inquisitor watches, holding the list of names you are forbidden to see. Now, you might ask, did you have a lawyer? Technically, yes. Canon law allowed for the accused to have legal counsel. But in practice, this was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Any lawyer who defended a suspected heretic too vigorously ran the very real risk of being accused of abetting heresy himself. Unsurprisingly, most lawyers found they had urgent appointments elsewhere when an Inquisition trial came up. So, you stand alone. You are an illiterate peasant or a town merchant, untrained in theology/law, facing a man who has spent his entire life studying the intricate trapdoors of logic. It is not a fair fight. It was never intended to be. The goal is not justice in the adversarial sense. The goal is truth, and the Church believes it already possesses the truth. You are just the variable that needs to be solved. There is, however, one fascinating legal loophole: a Hail Mary pass for the accused. Since you don't know who accused you, the court allows you to submit a list of your mortal enemies. If you can name a person and prove that they have a deadly hatred for you, say a neighbor you've been suing over a property line for 10 years, and if that person happens to be one of the anonymous witnesses, their testimony is thrown out. It is the only moment of agency you have. Suddenly, the trial becomes a desperate memory game. You have to comb through every grudge, every argument, every sour look you've received in the last 20 years. You have to list them all. It is a grim inventory of your own social failures, read aloud to a priest. John the baker hates me because I said his bread was sour. Mary the weaver hates me because my dog chased her cat. The inquisitor listens, nodding. Sometimes, this actually works. It is a strange paradox. Your salvation might depend on proving that you are so unlikable that people would lie just to see you burn. But let's pause for a moment of historical nuance. Historians often debate the unfairness of this system compared to the secular courts of the time. We look back with horror at the lack of defense. But we must remember that if you were accused of treason against the king in 1250, you weren't exactly getting a team of high-priced attorneys and a jury of unbiased citizens either. In some ways, the Inquisition was actually more thorough than secular courts. They kept better records. They didn't just execute people on a whim. They required 2 witnesses for a conviction, even if they were anonymous. The inquisitor was a professional, not a local lord with a hangover and a bad temper. In a dark, twisted way, it was an advancement in legal procedure, a move away from trial by ordeal, like holding a hot iron, to trial by evidence. It just happened that the evidence was often extracted from a terrified mind. The trial is not a single event. It is a process that can drag on for weeks, months, or even years. Between sessions, you are returned to prison. This is the weapon of time. The Inquisition had different grades of imprisonment. There was the murus lagus, or open wall, where you could walk around the cell and maybe see visitors. Then there was the murus strictus, the strict wall. This was solitary confinement, often in chains on bread and water. The darkness here is absolute. The sensory deprivation breaks you down faster than any whip. You sit in the dark, wondering if it has been day or night, wondering if your family has forgotten you. The only person who talks to you is the Inquisitor, and eventually, you start to crave his presence. You start to want to please him just to hear a human voice. This is the psychological genius of the system. It makes the accuser into the only source of comfort. And money. We cannot forget the mundane reality of money. The Inquisition did not have a budget for room and board. In many cases, the prisoner's family had to pay for their food and imprisonment. Imagine the irony. Your wife is selling the family cow to pay the church to keep you locked in a dungeon. If you were wealthy, the church would confiscate your property upon conviction. This led to the cynical, but likely accurate, observation by contemporaries that heresy seemed to appear most frequently where the bank accounts were largest. As one medieval commentator wryly noted, "It is much harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven, but it is very easy for him to enter the inquisitor's jail." As the weeks turn into months, the resolve fades. The secret court has done its work. It has isolated you, confused you, and stripped away your defenses. You are tired. You just want it to end. The inquisitor calls you back in, The candle is burning low. The scribe dips his pen. "Do you remember now?" the inquisitor asks softly. "Do you remember the night in the forest?" And finally, the words come. Maybe they are true. Maybe they are what he wants to hear. Maybe in the fog of exhaustion, you can no longer tell the difference. You speak. The scribe writes. The secret is out. And in the silence that follows, you realize that the court was never really trying to find out if you were guilty. It was trying to make you agree that they were right. The door unlocks not to freedom, but to the next stage, judgment. And the quill scratches on, the loudest sound in the world. The air grows colder here. We are descending now, leaving the relative civility of the courtroom for the damp, windowless reality of the cellar. The stone walls sweat with moisture, and the silence is different, heavier, more expectant. In the flickering light of a torch, shadows dance across instruments of wood and rope that look deceptively simple, almost like farm tools. But these are not for farming. We have arrived at the most infamous, and perhaps most misunderstood, chapter of the Inquisition, the Chamber of the Question. To understand what happens here, we must first strip away the Hollywood myths. The Inquisition did not torture everyone. In fact, compared to the secular courts of kings and princes, where torture was often the first resort for a stolen chicken, the church was surprisingly hesitant. For decades, canon law strictly forbade clergymen from shedding blood. It was a paradox. How could a priest, whose hands held the Eucharist, also hold a whip? But in 1252, Pope Innocent IV issued the bull Ad Extirpanda, a document that changed history with a single terrifying logic. If a king can use pain to catch a thief who steals gold, surely the church can use pain to catch a heretic who steals souls. The logic was grim, but to the medieval mind, irrefutable. However, there were rules, strict rules. The Inquisition was not a chaotic dungeon of sadists. It was a bureaucracy of pain. Torture could only be applied if there was already half-proof, strong evidence, but not a full confession. It could not be used to start an investigation, only to finish one. And most importantly, the rules stated that the torture could not cause the loss of a limb or endanger life. It was to be citra sanguinis effusionem, without the shedding of blood. This sounds merciful until you realize the terrifying creativity it inspired. If you cannot cut a man, you must find other ways to break him. Enter the strappado. It is a simple device, a pulley, a rope, and a beam in the ceiling. The accused's hands are tied behind their back, and the rope is attached to their wrists. Then, they are slowly hoisted into the air. The pain is immediate and excruciating. The shoulders are pulled backward, straining the sockets, the chest muscles stretching to the tearing point. It leaves no blood. It breaks no bones initially. But if the prisoner does not speak, the inquisitor might order a squassation, a sudden drop, stopped just before the feet touch the floor. The jerk dislocates the shoulders with a sickening pop. It is clean, it is bloodless, and it is agonizing. Or consider the toca, the water torture. The prisoner is tied to a rack or a ladder, sloping downward so the head is lower than the feet. A cloth is placed over the mouth and nose. Water is then poured slowly, steadily, onto the cloth. The sensation is that of drowning, the primal, panic-inducing feeling of suffocation. The stomach fills with water, the lungs burn for air. It is the ancestor of modern waterboarding. Again, no blood is shed. The body remains intact, but the mind is shattered. The Inquisitor does not do this himself. He sits at a small desk, often behind a curtain or in the corner, with the notary. The actual work is done by the executioner, a secular official. The Inquisitor's role is to ask the questions. "Tell the truth," he says, his voice calm amidst the screams. "Why do you resist? We only want to save you." This is the psychological horror. The pain is presented as a choice. You are doing this to yourself by remaining silent. I am merely waiting for you to stop hurting yourself. It is a twisted form of therapy, where the doctor breaks your arm to fix your fever. There is a chilling bureaucratic loophole that historians often discuss. The rules stated that torture could not be repeated. You could only be tortured once. But the Inquisitors, ever the lawyers, found a way around this. If the prisoner did not confess, the session was not ended. It was merely suspended. The next day or the next week, they would simply continue the same session. It was a semantic trick that allowed for indefinite agony. "We are not repeating the torture," they would write in the logs. "We are merely resuming the questioning from yesterday." And the logs. Oh, the logs. The notary records everything. Not just the confession, but the sounds. In the margins of these centuries-old documents, we find notes like "Iulatus," he screamed, or "Dixit quod moriabatur," he said he was dying. The meticulousness is haunting. They recorded the duration of the session, the amount of water poured, the number of turns on the rack. It was data. It was proof that the procedure was followed correctly. The Inquisitor could look at the file later and say, "See? We followed the rules. We did not kill him." But why? Why did they believe this worked? We know today that torture produces unreliable information. People will say anything to stop the pain. A man will confess to flying to the moon if you hurt him enough. The Inquisitors were not stupid. They knew this risk. The manuals even warn against it. To counter this, the confession made under torture was technically invalid. The prisoner had to ratify it freely, usually 24 hours later, in a different room, without fear or pressure. Of course, the threat hung in the air like smoke. If you retracted your confession, you were essentially saying, "I haven't learned my lesson yet," and the suspended session would resume. It was a loop. The only way out was to embrace the lie, to make it your truth. There is a profound theological tragedy here. The Inquisitors believed they were doing a kindness. If a body is infected with gangrene, you cut off the leg to save the life. If a soul is infected with heresy, you torment the body to save the soul from eternal hellfire. A few hours of the strappado is nothing compared to eternity in the lake of fire. In their minds, they were not monsters. They were stern fathers. They were saving their children from playing in traffic. This logic of pain is what allowed good men, men who prayed, men who gave to the poor, to oversee such horror without blinking. They had weaponized compassion. Imagine the scene as the session ends. The prisoner is lowered. He is broken, weeping, shivering on the cold stone floor. The executioner unties the ropes. The Inquisitor steps forward, not with a sneer, but with a look of relief. "It is done," he might say gently. "Now you can be reconciled to God." The notary brings the parchment. The prisoner, hands shaking too much to hold a quill, perhaps just makes a mark, a cross, a shaky X. It is the signature of his defeat. He has given them what they wanted: names, beliefs, secrets. He has been emptied. We leave the cellar now. The door closes, muffling the sounds of the next patient. We ascend back into the light, but the world looks different. We have seen the machinery of the absolute, the place where the human body is just a lock to be picked. The logic of pain has shown us that when you believe you are fighting for eternity, there is no limit to what you will do in the present. And as the 13th century gives way to the 14th, and the 14th to the 15th, the machine will only grow more efficient. The tools will change, the names will change, but the logic, the terrible, righteous logic, will remain the same. The silence of the archive is deafening, filled with the echoes of those who screamed in the dark, and the scratching of the pens that wrote it all down as justice. The air shifts again, growing warmer, drier, carrying the scent of dust and dried rosemary. We have crossed the Pyrenees and descended into the sun-baked plains of Castile and Aragon. The year is 1478, and the light here is blinding. It is a harsh, unforgiving illumination that seems to bleach the color from the earth, leaving behind a landscape of stark contrasts: shadow and light, silence and noise, gold and blood. We are in Spain, a land that is about to give the Inquisition its most famous and terrifying face. But to understand why, we must first understand that Spain is not like the rest of Europe. For 700 years, it has been a borderland, a place where Islam, Judaism, and Christianity have danced a long, complex tango of war and coexistence known as La Convivencia. In cities like Toledo and Cordoba, mosques stood beside cathedrals, and scholars of three faiths translated Aristotle together. It was messy, it was often violent, but it was a world of shared existence. Now, however, that world is ending. The Reconquista, the Christian reconquest of the peninsula, is nearing its final triumphant conclusion. The Muslim kingdom of Granada is the last domino waiting to fall. And on the thrones of Aragon and Castile sit two young, ambitious monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. They are the power couple of the 15th century, shrewd, devout, and utterly ruthless. They do not just want to rule a collection of kingdoms, they want to forge a nation. And in their minds, a unified nation requires a unified soul. You cannot have one Spain if you have three religions. To them, diversity is not strength. It is a weakness, a crack in the armor where the enemy might enter. They envision a state where to be Spanish is to be Catholic, and to be anything else is to be a foreigner in your own home. This is where the Spanish turn happens. In the past, the Inquisition was a tool of the Pope, a way for Rome to police theology. But Ferdinand sees something else in it. He sees a weapon. He petitions Pope Sixtus IV, a man more interested in Italian politics and art than Spanish souls, for permission to establish an Inquisition in Spain. The Pope agrees, perhaps thinking it will be like the old medieval tribunals. He is wrong. Ferdinand maneuvers brilliantly, ensuring that the Spanish crown, not the Pope, has the power to appoint the inquisitors. The Church provides the spiritual license, but the king holds the leash. It is a masterstroke of political engineering. Suddenly, the Inquisition is not just a religious court. It is a department of the state, the first national police force in European history. The primary target of this new machine is not the witch or the Protestant, who hasn't been invented yet. It is the converso. To understand the converso, we have to rewind slightly. In 1391, massive anti-Jewish riots swept across Spain. Thousands were killed, tens of thousands, terrified, converted to Christianity to save their lives and their families. Over the next century, these new Christians thrived. They entered the government, the nobility, and even the church hierarchy. They were tax collectors, doctors, and bishops, and this success bred a deep, simmering resentment among the old Christians who looked at their new neighbors with suspicion. "They are not truly one of us," the whispers went. "They still wash their hands before meals. They still change their linen on Fridays. They are secret Jews, a fifth column waiting to betray us." This paranoia finds its perfect outlet in the new Inquisition. The institution is designed to hunt these secret Judaizers. And here, the tragedy deepens. The Inquisition introduces a concept that will stain Spanish history for centuries: limpieza de sangre, or purity of blood. For the first time, heresy is not just about what you believe, it is about who your grandfather was. Even if a converso is a devout Catholic, his blood is seen as tainted. The Inquisition becomes a mechanism for purging this impure element from the body politic. Historians still argue fiercely about whether this was primarily a religious movement or a cynical land grab. Was Ferdinand motivated by a genuine fear of hell, or did he simply realize that when you arrest a wealthy converso, the crown gets to confiscate his property? The answer, as is often the case with politicians, is likely both. Ferdinand was a pious man who probably believed he was doing God's work, but he certainly didn't mind that God's work helped balance the royal budget. The atmosphere in Seville, where the first tribunal opens in 1480, changes overnight. The city, famous for its orange trees and easygoing rhythm, becomes a place of whispers. The Edict of Grace is read in the plazas, a 30-day period to confess. But unlike the medieval inquisitors who sought to correct errors, the Spanish inquisitors are hunting for an identity. They publish lists of signs to watch for. Does your neighbor cook with oil instead of lard? Jews don't eat pork fat. Does your neighbor wear clean clothes on Saturday? Does he turn his face to the wall when he dies? These mundane cultural habits are weaponized. Suddenly, frying an egg in olive oil is not a culinary choice. It is a capital crime. The Spanish turn transforms the private sphere, the kitchen, the bedroom, the dining table, into a crime scene. We can imagine the sheer disorientation of the people. A family that has been Christian for 3 generations, whose children know no Hebrew and have never been to a synagogue, suddenly finds themselves accused because their grandmother was seen lighting a candle on a Friday night 40 years ago. The logic of the Inquisition collapses time. Past sins are present dangers, and because the tribunal is state-run, there is no appeal to Rome. The Pope actually tries to intervene a few times, appalled by the severity of the Spanish inquisitors, but Ferdinand, politely, and sometimes not so politely, tells him to stay out of Spanish business. It is a chilling reminder that when faith becomes nationalism, even the vicar of Christ can be told to sit down. The terror is not just in the arrest, it is in the bureaucracy. The Spanish Inquisition becomes famous for its meticulous record-keeping. Every trial, every confiscation, every genealogy is recorded in triplicate. They create a vast archive of bloodlines that will haunt Spain for centuries. If you want a job in the government, or a commission in the army, or to marry into a noble family, you have to prove you have clean blood, that you have no Jewish or Muslim ancestors. The Inquisition becomes the gatekeeper of social advancement. It is the first time a state has tried to curate its own population based on genetic and spiritual purity. As the sun sets over the Guadalquivir River in Seville, the first fires are lit. 6 people are burned in 1481. It is a small number compared to what is coming, but the smoke sends a message that travels faster than any horseman. The old world of convivencia is dead. The new Spain is being born, and its birth pangs are being managed by men in black hoods who believe that unity is worth any price. Ferdinand and Isabella have unleashed a force they can barely control, a holy bureaucracy that will eventually consume not just the conversos, but the intellectual and cultural life of Spain itself. The Spanish turn has locked the wheels of the nation onto a track that leads straight into the dark, and there is no break. The silence of the night is broken only by the scratching of quills and the crackle of distant flames, as the state begins the long, slow work of purifying its own shadow. The shadow lengthens now, stretching from the palaces of the king into the narrow, winding streets of the Juderia, the old Jewish quarters of Spanish cities. But the streets are different here. The synagogues have bells now. The Hebrew script above the doorways has been chiseled away or plastered over. We are walking through a world that is holding its breath. The year is moving toward the catastrophic crescendo of 1492. But for the people living here, the conversos, the new Christians, the catastrophe has already moved inside their homes. It sits at their dinner tables. It sleeps in their beds. We have left the broad strokes of political history to enter the intimate, suffocating theater of domestic life, where the Inquisition did its most effective and tragic work. Imagine you are a merchant in Toledo. Your name is Juan de Sevilla. Your grandfather was a rabbi. You were baptized as a child, perhaps during the terrifying riots of 1391. Or perhaps you converted later to avoid the crushing taxes levied on Jews. You go to Mass every Sunday. You recite the creed. You wear a cross. You are, by all legal definitions, a Christian. But in the eyes of the old Christians, the neighbors whose families have eaten pork for 500 years, you are a fraud. You are a marrano, a crude slur meaning swine. And the Inquisition is not just watching you. It is listening to the silence in your kitchen. This is the terror of the converso's life. It is a performance that never ends. Every meal is a test. Every gesture is a potential confession. The Inquisition has published the Edict of Faith, a list of signs that betray a secret Jew. And the list is terrifyingly mundane. If you put on a clean shirt on Saturday, are you honoring the Sabbath? If you sweep your floor from the door inwards, are you following a Jewish custom? If you wash your hands before eating, is it hygiene or is it a ritual ablution? The Inquisition has effectively criminalized cleanliness and family tradition. You find yourself in a bizarre, paranoid dance where you must perform Christianity so loudly that no one can doubt you. You buy a ham, not because you are hungry, but to hang it in your window where the neighbors can see it. You cook with lard, even if the smell makes you retch, just so the scent drifts into the street. It is a culinary theater of survival. Historians and sociologists have long been fascinated by this crypto-Judaism. For decades, the dominant narrative was that these families were heroic secret Jews, passing down the torch of their faith in cellars, lighting candles in cupboards, and whispering Hebrew prayers while pretending to be Catholic. It is a romantic, defiant image, But in recent years, a fierce scholarly debate has erupted, led most notably by the historian Benzion Netanyahu. He argued that the vast majority of conversos were actually just Christians. They had converted, assimilated, and wanted to be left alone. In this view, the secret Jew was largely a fantasy invented by the Inquisition to justify stealing their wealth and destroying their social power. The tragedy, then, is not that they were caught practicing Judaism. It is that they were burned for a heresy that didn't exist. They were killed not for what they did, but for who their ancestors were. Whether they were secretly faithful or tragically assimilated, the psychological toll was the same. The converso family becomes a fortress of secrets. Parents stop telling their children about their heritage. Why burden a 6-year-old with a secret that could get them killed? If the child doesn't know, the child can't accidentally mention grandma's special bread to a priest. So the memory fades. Traditions become habits with no name. A family might continue to light candles on Friday night because it brings good luck, having forgotten entirely that it is the Sabbath. The Inquisition forces a kind of cultural amnesia, erasing 1,000 years of history in 2 generations. The year 1492 arrives like a hammer blow. Ferdinand and Isabella, flush with the victory over Granada, issue the Alhambra decree. All Jews must convert or leave Spain forever. It is a moment of shattering heartbreak. We see the roads of Spain clogged with refugees, families selling their homes for a donkey, taking only what they can carry. But for the conversos who stay, the trap snaps shut. Now, there are no more open Jews to blame. If there is heresy, it must be hidden. The Inquisition turns its gaze inward with renewed ferocity. The converso's shadow is no longer just a metaphor. It is a legal category. We see this most vividly in the tragic, absurd trials of the time. A woman is accused because she didn't eat calamari, which isn't kosher. A man is accused because he turned his face to the wall while dying, a reflex of comfort, interpreted as a rejection of the last rites. The witnesses are often servants, disgruntled employees, or debtors. The Inquisition inadvertently creates a society of snitches. If you owe a converso money, accusing him of heresy is a great way to cancel the debt. The moral rot spreads. The purity of blood statutes, limpieza de sangre, begin to lock conversos out of guilds, universities, and public office. It creates a caste system based on biology, a grim precursor to modern racism. Yet, amidst the fear, there is a dark, resilient humor. We find records of conversos who, pushed to the brink, used irony as a shield. One man, upon being told he must eat pork to prove his faith, reportedly said, "If eating pork is what makes a Christian, then my dog is a better Christian than the bishop." He was arrested, of course. But the joke survives in the archives, a tiny spark of defiance. There is also the tragicomedy of the reconciled, those who confessed, did penance, and were forced to wear the San Benito, a yellow tunic with a red cross. They had to wear it in public for years. It was a walking billboard of shame. But once their penance was over, the tunic wasn't thrown away. It was hung in the local parish church with their name on it forever. The shame was designed to outlive the sinner. As the 16th century dawns, the converso problem begins to change. The original generation, those who remembered the synagogue, who knew the prayers, dies out. Their children know only the fear. The heresy becomes more abstract, a ghost story told by inquisitors to justify their salaries. The Jewish community of Spain, once the most vibrant in the world, the Sepharad of poets and philosophers, is gone. It has been scattered to the winds, to Amsterdam, to Salonika, to the New World. But in Spain, it leaves a phantom limb. The Inquisition has successfully amputated a part of the Spanish soul, and the nation will feel the ache for centuries. We leave the Converso's house now. The candles are blown out. The ham hangs in the window, turning grey in the heat. The family is sleeping, or pretending to. They have survived another day. But outside, in the high castles of the administration, a new figure is rising. He is a man who does not sleep, a man whose name will become synonymous with the entire machinery of the Inquisition. He is not a king, but he holds the conscience of the Queen in his hand. The shadow in the street is about to get a face, and that face belongs to the Grand Inquisitor. The shadow we saw lingering in the Converso street now has a name, a face, and a terrible, quiet power. We are moving from the victims to the architect. The year is 1483, and we are entering the austere, whitewashed cell of a Dominican monastery in Segovia. The air here smells of incense and old wool. There are no luxuries. The man kneeling in prayer is 63 years old, thin to the point of emaciation, his eyes burning with a fervor that makes younger men look away. He wears a hair shirt under his habit, a rough, scratchy garment designed to constantly irritate the skin, a reminder that the body is an enemy to be subdued. He eats no meat. He sleeps on a wooden plank. He does not take bribes. He is terrifyingly incorruptible. This is Tomás de Torquemada, the first Grand Inquisitor of Spain, and perhaps the only man in history who could make a king and queen tremble with a whisper. To understand the Inquisition, you must understand Torquemada not as a monster, but as a believer. History has often painted him as a sadistic villain, a caricature of evil, wringing his hands in a dungeon. The truth is far more unsettling. Torquemada was a man of absolute crystalline conviction. He believed with every fiber of his being that heresy was a cancer eating the soul of Spain. He believed that allowing a heretic to live was an act of cruelty, not mercy, because it endangered the salvation of the entire kingdom. He was the confessor to Queen Isabella when she was just a young princess. He shaped her conscience. He taught her that a ruler's first duty was not to the people's bodies, but to their souls. When she took the throne, he was there, the dark conscience standing just behind the velvet curtain. Under his direction, the Inquisition transformed from a scattered collection of tribunals into a single monolithic machine, the Consejo de la Suprema y General Inquisition, or simply the Supreme. This was a council that stood above local laws, above bishops, and in many ways, above the law of the land. Torquemada wrote the Instrucciones, the operational code for this new state within a state. He standardized the rules. He created a network of familiars, lay servants of the Inquisition, who acted as bodyguards, informants, and enforcers. These men were exempt from secular prosecution and taxes, creating a privileged class of secret police that permeated Spanish society. Suddenly, the Inquisition was everywhere. It was in the market, in the port, in the university. Torquemada didn't just hunt heretics. He built a bureaucracy of surveillance that would be the envy of any modern dictator. There is a profound historical irony that scholars often debate regarding Torquemada's own bloodline. It is widely believed, though never proven during his lifetime for obvious reasons, that Torquemada himself came from a converso background. His uncle, the Cardinal Juan de Torquemada, was a celebrated theologian whose grandmother was likely a conversa. If this is true, it adds a layer of Shakespearean tragedy to the horror. Was his zeal a way of purifying his own blood? Was he trying to prove, with fire and ink, that he was more Christian than the old Christians? It is a psychological knot we may never untangle. The man most obsessed with purity may have been driven by a secret fear of his own stain. The defining moment of his life, and perhaps the most cinematic scene in the entire history of the Inquisition, comes in 1492. Granada has fallen, Spain is unified, but the Jewish question remains. The king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella, are pragmatic. They need money to rebuild the kingdom. The Jewish community, terrified of expulsion, offers a massive bribe, 30,000 ducats, to the monarchs in exchange for the right to remain in Spain. The king is tempted. It is a fortune. It could fund armies, build ships, secure the future. Legend tells us that Torquemada bursts into the royal chamber. He does not bow. He walks straight to the table where the gold is piled. He pulls a crucifix from under his robes, a wooden Christ on the cross. He slams it down onto the pile of coins. His voice is not a scream, but a cold, hard rasp. Judas Iscariot sold his master for 30 pieces of silver. He tells the king and queen, "Your highnesses would sell him again for 30,000. Here he is. Take him and sell him." He turns and leaves the room. The king and queen are stunned. The shame, the religious guilt, the sheer audacity of the monk paralyzes them. The offer is rejected. The Alhambra decree is signed. The Jews are expelled. In that single moment of theatrical fanaticism, Torquemada alters the genetic and cultural destiny of Spain forever. He has chosen purity over prosperity, dogma over humanity. But power comes with a price. As the years pass, the Grand Inquisitor becomes a prisoner of his own terror. He knows he is hated. He receives death threats daily. The man who sends thousands to the stake lives in constant fear of assassination. He travels with a retinue of 50 mounted spearmen and 200 foot soldiers. He eats only food prepared by trusted servants, terrified of poison. He keeps a unicorn's horn, likely a narwhal tusk, on his table, believing it has magical properties to detect toxins. The architect of fear is now the most frightened man in Spain. He retires to the monastery of St. Thomas in Avila, a fortress-like building he designed himself. Even there he is not safe from his own mind. He spends his final days in prayer, surrounded by guards, listening for footsteps in the corridor. When he finally dies in 1498 of natural causes, there is a collective exhale across the peninsula. But the machine he built does not stop. He has wound the clock too tight. The gears are engaged. He leaves behind a manual, a council, and a precedent. He has taught the state that conscience is a matter of national security. He has shown that a single man, driven by a singular idea of truth, can reshape reality for millions. We stand now at the gate of the monastery in Avila. The old man is gone, buried under a simple slate in the chapel, though his tomb will be moved later to prevent desecration. The wind howls across the Meseta, cold and biting. The legacy of Torquemada is not just in the ashes of the burned, it is in the silence of the living. He proved that terror, when bureaucratized, becomes self-sustaining. He didn't just hunt heretics. He created a world where heresy was the only thing that mattered. And as the 16th century dawns, the machine he built is about to stage its most spectacular production yet. A ritual that will turn the act of judgment into a public theater of the bizarre and the holy. The auto da fe is coming, and the stage is already being set in the main plaza. The sun has not yet risen, but the city is already awake. We are in the main plaza of Valladolid, or perhaps Madrid, in the mid-16th century. The air is cool and smells of sawdust, horse manure, and the nervous sweat of 10,000 people. Today's a holiday. The shops are closed. The balconies are draped in tapestries. The king himself might be here, sitting in a specially constructed box with velvet cushions. But this is not a joust, and it is not a coronation. This is the auto da fe, the act of faith. It is the grandest, most terrifying, and most spectacular piece of theater in the early modern world. And like all great theater, it is designed not just to be watched, but to be felt. To understand the auto, we must discard the popular image of a quick, chaotic burning in a town square. That is a myth. The auto da fe was a meticulously choreographed liturgy, a massive public sermon that could last from dawn until dusk. It was a visual representation of the Last Judgment, brought down to earth for a day. For the people crowding into the plaza, buying meat pies and wine, it is a combination of a royal wedding, a solemn mass, and a public execution. It is the ultimate reality show, where the stakes are literally life and death. The night before, there was the procession of the Green Cross. A large wooden cross draped in black was carried through the streets to the plaza, guarded by the familiars of the Inquisition. It stands now in the center of the square, a silent sentinel. As the dawn breaks, the great procession begins. The church bells toll, a slow, mournful rhythm that vibrates in your chest. Here they come, the prisoners. They are not dragged. They walk in a solemn line, carrying unlit candles. But look closely at what they are wearing. This is where the theater becomes a language. They are dressed in San Benitos, yellow wool tunics that act as a billboard for their souls. The design on the tunic tells the crowd exactly what kind of sinner is passing by. A yellow tunic with a single red cross? That is a reconciliado, someone who confessed and is being welcomed back into the church, though they will live in shame. But look further down the line. There are others wearing black tunics, painted with flames and demons. These are the relajados, the relaxed ones. They are the unrepentant, the stubborn, the dogmatizers. They are walking to their deaths. On their heads, they wear the carroza, a tall conical hat also painted with flames. It is a dunce cap of doom, designed to make them look ridiculous and terrifying at the same time. The crowd falls silent as they pass. There is no jeering yet. The mood is one of heavy religious awe. These people are heretics, yes, but in this moment, they are also actors in a divine drama. They represent the damned. The inquisitors follow them, walking under golden canopies, dressed in their finest robes. They represent the saved. It is a living tableau of heaven and hell. They take their seats on the immense wooden scaffold built for the occasion. The prisoners sit on lower benches, the dock of shame. The king and queen, if they are present, swear an oath to protect the faith. The Inquisition effectively makes the monarchy bow to its spiritual authority in front of the entire nation. Then the preaching begins, and it goes on and on. The sermons at an auto da fe are legendary for their length and their fire. A famous preacher will spend hours explaining the nature of heresy, the mercy of the Church, and the justice of God. He points to the prisoners as tragic examples of what happens when arrogance clouds the mind. It is a history lesson, a theology class, and a political rally all rolled into one. We can imagine the crowd shifting on their feet, the sun climbing higher, the smell of the unwashed bodies growing stronger. It is an endurance test for everyone. Occasionally, a prisoner might collapse from exhaustion or fear. A doctor is sent to revive them, not out of kindness, but because the script requires them to be conscious for the sentencing. You cannot judge a fainting man. Finally, as the afternoon shadows lengthen, the sentences are read. This is the climax. The Inquisitor stands. The prisoners are called one by one. For the vast majority, perhaps 90% in some autos, the sentence is not death. It is confiscation of property, imprisonment, lashes, or exile. These people are reconciled. They are stripped of their San Benitos, which will later be hung in their parish churches as a permanent record of shame, and led away. They are broken, bankrupt, but alive. But then come the others, the ones in the flame-painted tunics. The Inquisitor reads their crimes: Judaizing, Lutheranism, stubborn refusal to confess. They are declared heretics, apostates, and prevaricators. And here, the Inquisition performs its most cynical and legally complex maneuver. The Church, as we know, cannot shed blood. So the Inquisitor does not sentence them to death. He formally relaxes them to the secular arm, the royal judges sitting nearby. He even recites a formulaic plea, asking the secular court to treat them with kindness and mercy, and to avoid effusion of blood. Historians have long argued about this legal fiction. Was it hypocrisy? Absolutely. Everyone knew that relaxing meant burning. The secular judge didn't have a trial. His job was simply to light the match. But to the legalistic mind of the Church, this distinction was vital. It kept their hands clean. They had merely diagnosed the illness. The state was the surgeon who performed the amputation. It allowed the Inquisitor to go home and sleep with a clear conscience, believing he had never ordered a death. The sun is setting now. The auto da fe is technically over. The Church's work is done. The procession reforms, but the mood has changed. The relaxed prisoners are led out of the plaza, through the city gates, to the Quemadero, the burning place. This is usually a stone platform outside the city walls, often near a river for easy cleanup. The crowds follow, but the atmosphere is less solemn now, more chaotic. This is the finale. At the stake, there is one last chance for mercy. If a prisoner agrees to confess and kiss the cross at the very last moment, they are granted the grace of being strangled before the fire is lit. It is a grim choice: die by choking or die by burning. Most choose the garrote, but a few, the stubborn ones, refuse. They stand amidst the bundles of wood, shouting their faith or their innocence until the smoke takes their voice. The fires burn into the night. The smell of roasted meat drifts over the city, a scent that will linger in the memory of every child who smells it. The next morning, the ashes are scattered into the river so that no relics remain. No martyr's bones can be collected. They have been erased. We walk back into the empty plaza. The wooden scaffolds are already being dismantled. The show is over. But the auto da fe has done its work. It has reinforced the social order. It has shown the people that the Church is powerful, that the king is pious, and that heresy leads to a terrible end. It was not just a punishment. It was a purification. The city feels cleaner to the faithful, purged of its toxins. But for the families of those who walked in yellow and black, the silence is louder than ever. The theater of faith has curtained their lives in darkness. And as the 16th century turns toward the 17th, the Inquisition will find that it needs new scripts for new enemies, because the world outside Spain is changing faster than the fires can burn. The wind shifts once more, blowing us eastward across the Mediterranean, away from the dry heat of Spain and toward the humid, marble-clad grandeur of Rome. We are leaving the era of the converso behind and entering a new age, one where the enemy is not a secret Jew hiding in a cellar, but a man with a telescope standing on a roof. The year is 1600, or perhaps 1633. The Renaissance has exploded across Italy, filling the world with light, perspective, and the rediscovery of ancient wisdom. But in the Vatican, the mood is not one of celebration. It is one of defense. To the north, a German monk named Martin Luther has shattered the unity of Christendom. The Protestant Reformation is tearing Europe apart, and the Church feels the ground shaking beneath its feet. The response to this earthquake is the Roman Inquisition, established in 1542 by Pope Paul III. Unlike its Spanish cousin, which was a tool of the state to purify bloodlines, the Roman Inquisition is a tool of the Church to purify ideas. It is the Holy Office, the intellectual immune system of Catholicism, and its target is the most dangerous thing in the world, the printed book. We find ourselves now in the Piazza Campo de' Fiori in Rome. It is a bustling market square, smelling of fish, artichokes, and wet cobblestones. But in the center stands a hooded statue that casts a long dark shadow over the fruit sellers. This is the monument to Giordano Bruno, a Dominican friar, philosopher, and mystic who made the fatal mistake of falling in love with the infinite. Bruno was not a scientist in the modern sense. He was a firebrand who believed that the universe was endless, filled with infinite worlds and infinite suns. This terrified the Church. If there are infinite worlds, did Christ die on all of them? Is the earth not the center of God's attention? Bruno was arrested, not for a crime of violence, but for a crime of imagination. He spent 7 years in the dungeons of the Holy Office. When the sentence of death was finally read to him, to be burned alive, he reportedly looked his judges in the eye and said, "Perchance you who pronounce my sentence are in greater fear than I who receive it." On February 17th, 1600, he was brought to this square. His tongue was imprisoned in a clamp to prevent him from speaking wicked things to the crowd. He was burned. The smoke rose up past the rooftops of Rome, a grim signal that the Church would not tolerate a universe it could not control. But Bruno was just the prologue. The true drama of the Roman Inquisition would center on a man who didn't just imagine the heavens, but actually looked at them. Enter Galileo Galilei. He is old, arrogant, brilliant, and arguably the most famous scientist in history. But in 1633, he is just a frightened man in his late 60s, kneeling in the convent of Santa Maria sopra Minerva. The story of Galileo is often told as a simple fable, science versus religion, the heroic truth-teller versus the blind dogma. But the reality, as historians love to complicate, is far more human and tragic. Galileo was not an atheist. He was a devout Catholic. He was friends with the Pope, Urban VIII. In fact, the Pope had encouraged him to write about the new theory that the Earth revolved around the Sun, the Copernican system, as long as he treated it as a mathematical hypothesis, not absolute truth. But Galileo, being a genius with an ego the size of Jupiter, couldn't help himself. He wrote his book, The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, and in it he put the Pope's own arguments into the mouth of a character named Simplicio, the simpleton. It was a public humiliation of his powerful friend. The Pope was furious. The Inquisition was called. This was not about whether the earth moved. It was about obedience. It was about who had the authority to interpret reality, the mathematician with his tube of glass, or the theologian with his Bible. The trial of Galileo is a masterpiece of psychological pressure. He is not tortured in the Spanish style. There is no rack, no strappado. He is a celebrity, after all. He is housed in comfortable apartments in the Vatican. But the threat of torture is there, spoken in polite, terrifying euphemisms. The inquisitors show him the instruments. They let him imagine the pain. They interrogate him for weeks. Did you receive permission to teach this? Did you hold this as true? Galileo, old and suffering from a hernia, tries to navigate the trap. He argues that the Bible tells us how to go to heaven, not how the heavens go. But the inquisitors are not interested in wit. They are interested in submission. Finally, the old man breaks. On June 22nd, 1633, dressed in the white shirt of a penitent, he kneels and reads a statement prepared for him. I, Galileo, abandon the false opinion that the sun is the center of the world and immovable. It is a moment of profound sadness. The greatest mind of his generation is forced to deny what he has seen with his own eyes. The legend says that as he stood up, he muttered under his breath, "Eppur si muove," and yet it moves. Most historians agree he probably didn't say it out loud. That would have been a death sentence. But the sentiment rang true. The earth didn't care about the Inquisition. It kept spinning. Galileo is sentenced to house arrest for the rest of his life. He retires to his villa in Arcetri, near Florence. He goes blind. He continues to work, secretly smuggling out a book on physics to be published in Holland, beyond the reach of the Roman censors. But the damage is done. The Roman gaze has sent a chill through the intellectual life of Italy. For the next century, the center of scientific gravity will shift north to England and France, where the Inquisition cannot reach. The Church has won the battle for obedience, but it has lost the war for the future. The weapon of this new war is not just the fire. It is the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the index of forbidden books. This is the bureaucracy of silence. Established in 1559, the index is a list of books that no Catholic is allowed to read, sell, or own under pain of excommunication. It is updated regularly, a rolling blacklist of dangerous ideas. The censors in Rome are overworked, reading thousands of books from all over Europe, looking for errors. They are the editors of the Catholic mind. They don't just ban books, they mutilate them. If a book is mostly good, but has a few bad sentences, they issue an expurgated version. We can imagine a scholar in a library in Bologna, opening a treatise on medicine or history, only to find entire paragraphs blacked out with heavy ink. It is a visual representation of the gaps in knowledge enforced by law. The index creates a black market for knowledge. Banned books become valuable. They are smuggled in bales of hay, in wine barrels, in false-bottom trunks. The forbidden becomes seductive. But for the average person, the index works. It narrows the horizon. It creates a safe, intellectual space where nothing challenges the established order. The Roman Inquisition becomes a police force of the mind, monitoring not just what you say, but what you read. It is worth noting a touch of dark humor in the bureaucracy. The censors were often so overwhelmed by the flood of printed books that they couldn't keep up. Sometimes, a book would be on the to-be-reviewed pile for 20 years. By the time they got around to banning it, the author was dead, and the ideas had already spread everywhere. It was a slow-motion attempt to stop a flood with a teaspoon. There is also the irony that some authors wanted to be on the index. It was the best advertising money couldn't buy. If the Pope banned your book, everyone in Protestant Europe immediately bought a copy to see what the fuss was about. As we leave Rome, the sun sets over the dome of St. Peter's. The fires of the Spanish auto da fe are still burning in the west, but here the violence is quieter. It is the violence of the red pen, the locked library door, and the silenced telescope. The Roman Inquisition has turned its gaze to the stars and found them wanting. They have tried to arrest the motion of the planets. But as Galileo knew in his blindness, the universe is not a book you can edit. It is a vast, indifferent machine that turns and turns, regardless of what the Holy Office decides. And soon, the ships sailing from the ports of Europe will carry this machine of judgment across the Atlantic to a new world where the stars look different, but the fear remains the same. The salt spray hits our faces now. We are leaving the enclosed plazas of Europe and stepping onto the creaking deck of a galleon, pitching in the swells of the Atlantic. The year is sometime in the late 16th century, and the Holy Office is doing something no legal system has ever done before. It is crossing an ocean. The Inquisition is going global. As the coastline of Spain fades into the grey mist, we turn our eyes west, toward a world that is humid, vast, and terrifyingly unknown. We are bound for the viceroyalties of New Spain, Mexico, and Peru, where the jungle meets the silver mines, and where the church faces a challenge it never imagined: how to police the soul in a place that feels like the edge of the map. When the ships arrive in the sweltering ports of Veracruz or Cartagena, they unload not just muskets, horses, and smallpox, but also crates filled with familiar tools, shackles, hoods, and the green cross of the Holy Office. The Inquisition establishes its three great tribunals in the New World: Lima, 1570, Mexico City, 1571, and later Cartagena, 1610. Walking through the streets of colonial Mexico City, the atmosphere is thick, literally. The air is thin at this altitude, the sun is fierce, and the population is a dizzying mix of Spanish conquistadors, indigenous Aztecs and Mayans, enslaved Africans, and opportunistic merchants from every corner of Europe. To the inquisitors, this chaotic mixing is a nightmare. It is a spiritual petri dish where heresy could mutate into something new and uncontrollable. However, we must pause for a crucial historical distinction that often gets lost in the retelling. The Inquisition in the Americas had a very specific jurisdiction. It did not, for the most part, have authority over the indigenous people. The native populations, the Indians, were considered neophytes, new to the faith, and like children, they were deemed not fully responsible for their theological errors. If an Aztec man was caught worshipping an old idol, he was punished by the local bishop or a separate protester of the Indians, usually with a whipping. but he was rarely subject to the full terrifying machinery of the Holy Office. The Inquisition was there to police the Europeans, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, and the foreigners who might bring the Lutheran contagion or the Jewish secret into this virgin land. We see this tragedy unfold most poignantly in the story of the Carvajal family. Luis de Carvajal was the governor of the new Kingdom of Leon, a vast territory in northern Mexico. He was a powerful man, a converso of Jewish descent who had served the king loyally. But his family carried a secret. His sister and her children had reverted to the faith of their ancestors. They observed the Sabbath in the dusty, sun-baked haciendas of the frontier. They fasted on Yom Kippur, calling it the Great Day. For a while, the distance protected them. But the Inquisition has long arms. In 1590, the trap snaps shut. The entire family is arrested and dragged to Mexico City. The Palace of the Inquisition, a building that still stands today, heavy and imposing, becomes their tomb. The most heartbreaking figure is Luis de Carvajal the Younger, the governor's nephew. He is a mystic, a poet, a young man who changes his name to Joseph Lombroso, Joseph the Enlightened. In his cell, he writes a spiritual autobiography, carving the letters into avocado pits or writing on scraps of leather. He believes his suffering is a test from God. He even circumcises himself in prison using a bone. It is an act of desperate, bloody defiance. But the Inquisition does not admire defiance. It crushes it. The family is tortured. They are made to implicate one another. The mother accuses the son, the sisters accuse the brothers. It is the same old script played out on a new stage. On December 8th, 1596, the great auto da fe is held in the main plaza of Mexico City. It is a spectacle designed to rival anything in Madrid. The viceroy is there, the crowds are there, and the Carvajal family is there, wearing the sanbenitos. Luis the Younger is burned at the stake. As the flames rise, the new world learns the lesson of the old. There is no frontier far enough to escape the eye of the church. Further south, in the humid, walled city of Cartagena, in modern-day Colombia, the Inquisition takes on a different flavor. Cartagena is a port city, a hub of the slave trade and a nest of pirates. Here, the heresy is often less about theology and more about magic. The archives are filled with cases of sorcery, love potions made from dried toads, curses scratched onto lead tablets, and rituals blending African, indigenous, and Catholic symbols. The inquisitors here are like overwhelmed health inspectors trying to stop a plague of superstition. They arrest women for selling powders to tame abusive husbands. They interrogate enslaved men who claim to fly back to Africa at night. The Palace of the Inquisition in Cartagena becomes a place of bizarre, tropical Gothic horror, where the rigid logic of European canon law crashes into the fluid, magical reality of the Caribbean. There is a strange story from Lima involving the Angela of Carranza, a woman who claimed to give birth to puppies and have visions of the devil. The Inquisition investigated her not just as a heretic, but almost as a scientific curiosity. They were trying to determine if she was a witch, a fraud, or simply insane. This highlights a shift. By the 17th century, the Inquisition was becoming the Enlightenment's evil twin. It was obsessed with categorizing reality. It wanted to know what things were. Was this blasphemy? Or was it just a mental illness? They kept detailed notes on hallucinations, trances, and demonic voices. In doing so, They inadvertently created some of the first psychiatric case studies in history, written in the language of sin. The reach of the Holy Office even extended to the open sea. English and Dutch pirates captured in the Caribbean often found themselves in the dungeons of the Inquisition. These were Lutheran dogs, enemies of the state and the faith. But interestingly, many of them converted very quickly. A pirate who faced the stake would suddenly discover a deep love for the Virgin Mary. The inquisitors were skeptical, but they often accepted the conversion. It was a pragmatic game. The pirate saved his skin, the inquisitor saved a soul, and scored a political victory. We have records of English sailors living out their lives in Mexico or Peru, married to local women, ostensibly Catholic, but perhaps humming Anglican hymns when no one was listening. As the decades wear on, the Inquisition in the New World becomes a terrifyingly effective tool of social control. It censors books. It bans the works of Descartes and Newton. It tries to stop the flow of dangerous ideas from entering the ports. But the ocean is too wide. Books are smuggled in wine casks. The sons of wealthy Creoles go to Europe and come back with heads full of French philosophy. The Green Cross is powerful, but it is fighting a losing battle against the geography of the Americas. The distance breeds a certain laxity. Corruption seeps in. Inquisitors are accused of using their power to seize the best houses or to settle grudges with the viceroy. The institution begins to rot from the inside, bloated by its own authority. We stand now on the ramparts of Cartagena, looking out at the Caribbean sunset. The sky is a bruised purple. The Palace of the Inquisition stands behind us, a white fortress with a beautiful Baroque stone entrance that belies the suffering inside. It is a monument to the attempt to export fear. They brought the rack and the San Benito across the ocean, thinking they could transplant the medieval order to a new hemisphere. And for a time they did. They burned the Carvajals, they silenced the mystics, but they could not stop the mixing. The blood of the New World was too complex, too vibrant to be purified by fire. The New World reach has stretched the Inquisition to its breaking point, and soon, the ships arriving from Europe will bring something far more dangerous than pirates or Protestants. They will bring the books of Voltaire, the ideas of Rousseau, and the sharp, cold light of reason that will finally make the shadows retreat. The candle that has been burning for centuries flickers now. The air in the room changes. It is no longer the heavy, incense-laden atmosphere of a cathedral, nor the damp, metallic smell of a dungeon. We are entering a space that smells of freshly ground coffee, tobacco smoke, and the crisp, dangerous scent of new paper. The year is moving into the mid-18th century. We are in a salon in Paris, or perhaps a secret meeting in a back room in Madrid. Men in powdered wigs are laughing. They are reading a small scandalous pamphlet. And for the first time in history, the Inquisition is not being feared. It is being mocked. We have arrived at the Enlightenment. This is the era of reason, the century of lights. For the Inquisition, this is a far more deadly enemy than any heretic. You can burn a man, but you cannot burn a joke. And the philosophers of Europe, Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, have turned their sharpest wit against the Holy Office. In his masterpiece, Candide, Voltaire paints the Inquisition not as a divine instrument, but as a grotesque, absurd theater where people are burned for the good of the customs. He describes an auto da fe as a superstitious party thrown to prevent earthquakes. The world is laughing. And when the world laughs at a monster, the monster begins to shrink. But the monster is still dangerous. In Spain, the Bourbon kings have taken the throne, bringing with them a touch of French modernism. But they still find the Inquisition useful for controlling the populace. However, the nature of the crime has shifted. The Inquisition is no longer hunting secret Jews or Muslim sympathizers with the same ferocity. There are almost no Jews left in Spain to hunt. Instead, the inquisitors have become the thought police of the state. They are obsessed with Freemasons, liberals, and anyone caught reading the Encyclopédie. They are not looking for heresy in the soul. They are looking for sedition in the library. The tribunal has become a censorship bureau, a tired, bureaucratic beast that spends more time arguing about import tariffs on books than saving souls from hell. The sheer boredom of the later Inquisition is something historians often note. We have records of inquisitors complaining that they have nothing to do. The autos da fe become rare, almost nostalgic events. They are no longer the grand, terrifying spectacles of the past. They are smaller, quieter, almost embarrassed affairs. The fire is dying down. Between 1780 and 1820, there are very few executions. The institution is rotting from the inside, sustained only by the inertia of tradition and the fear of change. Then the storm breaks. In 1789, the French Revolution explodes. The King of France loses his head. The Church in France is stripped of its power. The shockwave hits Spain like a physical blow. The Inquisition tries to seal the border. They ban all French newspapers. They arrest anyone who speaks of liberty or rights. But ideas are like water. They find the cracks. And then, in 1808, the water turns into a flood. Napoleon Bonaparte invades Spain. This is the beginning of the end. When the French troops enter Madrid, they do not see the Inquisition as a holy court. They see it as a medieval relic, a symbol of everything the revolution fought against. On December 4th, 1808, Napoleon signs a decree abolishing the Inquisition. He orders the arrest of the inquisitors and the seizure of their property. There are dramatic, perhaps embellished, accounts of French soldiers breaking open the doors of the tribunals. In some stories, they find secret torture chambers with skeletons still chained to the walls. In others, they find luxury apartments where the inquisitors lived like princes, surrounded by fine wines and female companions. The truth is likely somewhere in between. What they certainly found were archives, mountains of paper documenting centuries of surveillance. The soldiers, many of them young men raised on the ideals of the Republic, mocked the Holy Fathers, cutting their robes with sabers and using the sacred papers to light their pipes. It was a violation of the sacred, a brutal secularization of the mystery. But the most powerful witness to this era is not a soldier. It is an artist, Francisco Goya. He is the court painter, a man who sees everything. In his series of etchings, The Disasters of War, and his later black paintings, he captures the grotesque reality of the Inquisition. He paints the tribunal of the Inquisition, a dark, claustrophobic scene where the accused sits in a conical hat, surrounded by faceless, menacing clerics. He strips away the glamour. There is no divine light in Goya's paintings. There is only stupidity, cruelty, and fear. He shows us the Inquisition not as God's work, but as man's nightmare. His art becomes the visual epitaph of the institution. Yet, history rarely moves in a straight line. when Napoleon is defeated and the French are driven out in 1814. The Spanish King Ferdinand VII returns. He is a reactionary, a man who wants to turn back the clock. He reinstates the Inquisition. "Long live chains!" shout his supporters in the streets. It is a bizarre, tragic moment. The people, exhausted by war and confused by the chaos of liberalism, cheer for the return of the very institution that oppressed them. They want the security of the old world, but this restored Inquisition is a zombie. It walks, it talks, but it has no soul. It has no teeth. The world has changed too much. The Pope himself is embarrassed by it. The other European powers look at Spain with pity and disgust. The Holy Office is now just a department of the police, harassing liberals and checking book bags at the border. It is a shadow of the terrifying giant that once made kings tremble. The final tragedy comes in 1826. It is the story of Cayetano Ripoll, a humble schoolmaster in Valencia. He is a deist. He believes in God, but not in the strict dogmas of the church. He is accused of not taking his students to Mass and of teaching them about nature instead of the Trinity. He is arrested. He is the last victim. But here is the telling detail. The Inquisition technically doesn't exist anymore. It has been rebranded as the Juntas de Fe, Faith Boards, and they cannot burn him. Burning is too medieval, too public, so they hang him. On July 26, 1826, Cayetano Ripoll is executed on a gibbet, his body put into a barrel painted with flames, a pathetic, symbolic nod to the fires of the past. He is the last man to die for the crime of heresy in Spain. The end is not a bang, but a whimper. In 1834, the Queen Regent Maria Cristina signs the final decree. The Inquisition is abolished forever. The doors of the tribunals are locked. The archives are transferred to the state. The furniture is sold. The prisons are repurposed. The light of reason has finally burned away the fog. But as the ink dries on the decree, a strange silence falls over Spain. The institution that defined the nation's soul for 350 years is gone. There are no more familiars walking the streets. No more secret accusations. No more auto da fe. The black legend of Spain will persist, fueled by Protestant propaganda and Gothic novels. But the reality is over. The machine has stopped. We stand in the dusty archive of Madrid, surrounded by millions of pages of testimony. The sunlight streams through a high window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Each speck of dust is a whisper, a secret, a life broken by the question, what do you believe? The light of reason has won, but it shines on a landscape scarred by centuries of enforced silence. The Inquisition is dead, but the question remains, has the fear it manufactured truly vanished, or has it just changed its name? We leave the archive, stepping out into the bright, noisy, messy confusion of the modern world, where the mind is free, but the shadow of the tribunal still lingers in the corners of our history. The ink on the decree of 1834 is dry. The Queen has signed it. The Inquisition is dead. But death, for an institution that lived for 6 centuries, is not a sudden event. It is a long, slow exhalation. We are standing now in the quiet aftermath, in the dusty, sun-mood-filled silence of the mid-19th century. The tribunal doors are unlocked, but no one rushes out because the cells are already empty. The furniture is being sold at auction. The desks where inquisitors wrote their reports, the chairs where the accused sat trembling, the heavy velvet curtains, all of it is now just second-hand lumber. The holy office, which once claimed to hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven, is being dismantled like a bankrupt shop. This is the final silence. It is the silence of a machine that has been unplugged. But as the physical machinery disappears, a new kind of noise begins to fill the void. This is the noise of memory, of myth, and of the black legend. For centuries, Protestant Europe had whispered about the horrors of the Spanish dungeons, the pit and the pendulum, the Iron Maidens, the walls that closed in. Now, writers like Edgar Allan Poe and Fyodor Dostoevsky turn the Inquisitor into the ultimate literary villain. In the Brothers Karamazov, the Grand Inquisitor is a cold, terrifying intellectual who tells Jesus that freedom is too heavy a burden for humanity to bear. "We have corrected your work," he says. This fictional inquisitor becomes more real to the world than the historical one ever was. The silence of the archives is drowned out by the scream of the novel. It will take another 150 years for the true silence to be broken. We fast forward now, the camera moving rapidly through the violent 20th century, past wars and revolutions, until we arrive in the quiet, climate-controlled rooms of the Vatican in 1998. Pope John Paul II, a man who knows the weight of history, orders the opening of the archives of the Holy Office of the Inquisition. For the first time, scholars are allowed to see the secret. They do not find a pit of bones. They do not find hidden machines of death. They find paper, millions and millions of pages of paper. What they find is perhaps more disturbing than the Gothic horror stories. They find the banality of evil. They find meticulously kept ledgers of expenses, 3 reals for rope, 2 reals for bread. They find letters from inquisitors complaining about their rheumatism or asking for a raise. They find a bureaucracy that looks terrifyingly like any modern government department, just with different goals. The monster was not a demon, it was a clerk. The horror was not in the sadism of a few, but in the indifference of the many. The final silence is the realization that the Inquisition was built by ordinary men who went home to their families, kissed their children, and believed they were doing the right thing. In the year 2000, during the Great Jubilee, the Pope stands in St. Peter's Basilica and does something unprecedented. He asks for forgiveness. He leads a day of pardon, acknowledging the sins committed in the service of truth. He does not use the word Inquisition explicitly in the prayer, but the world knows. He speaks of methods of intolerance and violence in the name of the faith. It is the Church admitting, finally, that the means do not justify the ends. The final silence is broken by a mea culpa. But does the Inquisition ever truly die? The institution itself, the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, still exists today in Rome. It still checks books. It still disciplines theologians. But the fires are out. The power to punish the body is gone. Yet the ghost of the Inquisition lingers in the human psyche. We see it whenever a society decides that safety is more important than liberty. We see it whenever a group decides that there is only one correct way to think, and that anyone who deviates is not just wrong, but impure. We see it in the cancel cultures of the left and the right, where the accusation is the verdict and the punishment is social exile. The technology has changed. We use Twitter instead of the auto-da-fe. But the instinct is ancient. It is the instinct to purify the tribe. The final silence, then, is not an ending. It is a mirror. As we look back at the 600 years of the Inquisition, from the first whispers in Languedoc to the last hanging in Valencia, we are not looking at a distant, alien past. We are looking at ourselves. We are seeing what happens when fear is allowed to become law. We are seeing how easy it is to rationalize cruelty if we believe we are on the side of the angels. The Inquisitor is not a monster under the bed. He is the part of us that wants certainty at any cost. We walk out of the archive now. The heavy doors close with a soft final click. The dust settles. The ghosts of the Cathars, the Conversos, the witches, and the scientists are at rest. Their screams have faded into the white noise of history. But the lesson remains, written in invisible ink on the walls of our own time. The price of freedom is the tolerance of error. The price of truth is the acceptance of doubt. And the moment we decide that we cannot tolerate the heretic, the one who thinks differently, we have already begun to build the dungeon. The sun sets over Europe. The cathedrals stand tall, beautiful, and silent. The marketplaces are busy, the world turns, the Inquisition is over. But the final silence asks us one last, haunting question. If the tribunal opened tomorrow, with new names and new flags, would we be the ones in the cells? Or would we be the ones signing the papers? The journey is complete. We have walked through 6 centuries of shadow and fire. Now, let the heavy velvet curtain of history fall back into place. The ink is dry, the book is closed. The candle that lit our way has burned down to a pool of warm wax. The voices of the inquisitors and the accused have faded into the gentle hum of the night. You are safe here, in the present, far from the cold stone walls and the scratching quills. The fear of the past cannot touch you now. It is just a story, a memory of how the world used to be, and a reminder of how far we have come. Let your breathing slow down, in and out. The weight of the centuries lifts from your shoulders. The darkness around you is not a dungeon. It is a warm, soft blanket of rest. The history is done. The lesson is learned. The silence is yours to keep. Sweet dreams.